Dave with Taboo Customs. We are finally back for our second video on an M715. It's been a while and we apologize about that, but when you're starting a huge project like this, there's a lot to kind of figure out at the beginning, and then we've had a lot of components that we've been trying to collect between ourselves and the customer. So we finally have a lot of those components. The major components are here, so we will talk about what we've chosen to use between us and the customer, why we've chosen to use those items, where we're going to be heading with those items. Then we will also do a little bit of time lapse, because today we are going to start disassembly on the Jeep, so we'll hopefully get the front clip pulled off. We'll see if we get the engine and transmission pulled out or not, maybe today, but we'll do a little bit of time lapse on that. We'll stop and point out anything interesting we might find every now and then. With an old Jeep like this, there's always something weird that pops up with it. We will also, at the end of this video, hopefully get our LS7 started. We're going to go ahead, fill up that bucket that's on the pallet. We'll get that started, and we'll take a look at how it sounds, how it runs. We'll only be able to start it for a few seconds, obviously, with no coolant and whatnot in it, so we'll want to be careful about that. So with that, let's take a look at the components that we have collected so far. So starting out with the components, obviously, for the heartbeat, everybody pretty much knows we've got the LS7 from the '06 Corvette, fully wired, fully ready to go, sitting on a pallet here. Should start on this pallet, and we want to go and start this on this pallet because we're getting ready to start, going in and modifying a few things, adding a air conditioning compressor and pulling the bell housing off the rear. But before we do any of that, I want to make sure it starts and runs correctly, because the folks that actually did this setup still own that. So if it's not running correctly right now, I'm going to want to work with them to figure out what's going on, because I haven't touched anything. And I don't want to go and modify anything and then try to work with them, because they're just going to tell me probably that, well, you touched it and you own it. So I want to make sure that works correctly. So we pretty much picked a full Chevy drivetrain. For the transmission, we've got a 4L80E. Bought a rebuilt transmission from Larry's Transmissions. Now, one thing to remember when you're looking at buying a rebuilt transmission, you might ask the rebuilder if they have the cover that goes underneath the torque converter. This one did not come with it, so we're going to have to spend another $100, $200 to probably find that cover, and then clean it up, get it painted like the current transmission. For transfer case, we went with a NP205. Obviously, both of these items we chose with the customer, partially due to it's a little bit easier to connect, obviously, a Chevy transmission to a Chevy engine, a Chevy transfer case to Chevy transmission. So we'll save a little bit in some of the adapters and whatnot that we'd have to use. Then also, these will hold up to that horsepower that we have to look at. Now we will go through, clean up, rebuild our NP205, go through, probably put a slip yoke eliminator on the rear of that. Now for the axles, we went with a 14-bolt full float rear axle, mainly because that axle is going to take the full brunt of the torque and horsepower that this engine is going to be putting out, along with the weight of the vehicle. It's going to be needing an axle that will definitely stand up to that. Now the front axle is a little bit different story. We actually thought we were getting a Dana 60 brought to us, but when it showed up, it was a GM 10-bolt front axle. So we don't do much work with the GM 10 bolts, so I still got to go through that, look at that. Now this Jeep will not be taken off-road, so the front axle is not of a huge concern, but I've still got to go through that, check out what parts I would need to get to make that work, and go from there. Anyway, let us know what you think of the drivetrain. Any comments or you may have on swaps that you've done in the past. But with that, we're going to go ahead and move on to starting our disassembly on the front end. Hopefully we can get the front clip off. Maybe we'll get the transmission and engine out. I'm not sure. We'll see where we get to today, because it's just me in here, so I got to figure out how to get it done myself. All right, so we've got the front clip off, and we're going to remove the front section of the front clip and then the fenders, and decided halfway through that we just pull the whole front clip off as one, probably a whole lot easier to do it that way, which it was. I should have mentioned before, we don't plan on really using any of the parts from the current front clip. They're all pretty well rusted through in a couple places, damaged in some others that are beyond repair. So we're going to be looking for some new parts and putting that together, hopefully with some new parts or better parts. As we got the front clip off, though, we did find a couple of issues. You can see here the steering box. I don't believe that's the stock mounting. You can see a piece of angle here, piece of 3/8 bar, piece of 1/2 inch plate, where it looks like they've remounted that steering box for some reason. Have to look at some things and see what happened there. Part of this maybe is due, or maybe the remounting of this has caused this too. This frame is actually cracked here. It's cracked underneath of this cross member, and it's cracked completely through here. So it looks like, it's just somewhat normal in some frames to see some cracking around steering boxes as they get older. But definitely that will need some repair. We'll have to figure out remounting of a new power steering box here eventually. Also, something real interesting is this hole here. This hole here is not supposed to be here. I don't think, you can see some area where it wore on the steering shaft, but I don't think the steering shaft created this hole. That would be pretty something. Almost looks like they took a grinder and tried to make some clearance perhaps for the steering shaft. I don't know. It might be that these engine mounts, and I'm guessing maybe even the engine, might not be original. Maybe someone took, and this looks made up here because this feels like it's flame cut. So chances are that wasn't there before when it was originally built. So anyway, it doesn't matter. We're going to be pulling all that out and redoing it. So I think that'll do it for the disassembly today. In the next video, we'll probably work on disassembling the motor, pulling that out, transmission, transfer case. Probably put it up on the lift for that, just to be able to get under it easier. For this video itself, our next part here is we are going to put some fuel in our bucket and try to get our LS7 running. Okay, I think we're about ready. So interesting enough, I had to add oil to it, which makes me wonder, because I've seen supposed videos of it running on this pallet. If it had enough oil, it didn't have. I had to add a couple quarts of oil to the dry sump container over there, so it's a little bit sketchy. Covered up the fuel can there, our bucket, with some weld blanket. Covered up the transmission with a weld blanket too, because the exhaust is just pointing right at it. I'm gonna try to start it. Obviously, there's no power steering fluid in it, there's no coolant, so we're going to run it for a couple of seconds, start it, check, see if the throttle response is there and working, and then we'll probably shut it down. So let's see how it goes. And I haven't tried this yet, so I have no idea. So now I know why there's no a whole lot of oil in the dry sump there, which makes sense. They probably would have had an oil cooler on it, and that oil that just shot out was probably going to the oil cooler, and it's now shot out, and well, shot about a good 10 feet. So need to get all that cleaned up, but it does run, does start, sounds all right. Hopefully we'll get it going. It does have an OBD2 port on the side. Probably can't run it enough really to check much right now. So, but I'm comfortable with it moving forward. Now I've got to go and get cleaned up because I'm coated in oil. But thanks for watching. We'll do a couple more videos probably on disassembly here. Hopefully we'll get to some reassembly before too long. The main thing first is going to be obviously getting the powertrain located and in place. Once we do that, we can start moving from there. We will end up probably getting the powertrain located and then working on suspension, because we want to get as much as we can done on the frame, and then we're going to disassemble the rest of the Jeep, send the frame out, have it sandblasted, powder coated, and then it'll come back and we'll be able to start really working on all the details as we get, you know, the engine, transmission, everything in place. And then obviously after that, spending a lot of time on the restoration and probably body work and everything else. So stay in touch, stay tuned, and keep watching. And as always, like or subscribe is greatly appreciated.